Hey, hello, howdy, how you doing? Welcome to part 8 of the 1000 Day series, covering days 702 through day 800. We left off last episode leaving March Ridge after some pretty hectic events forced me out of West Point. In this episode, you're going to see a pretty over-the-top base design, some substantial combat situations, and a ton of grinding for skills that really don't mean all that much to me. If you haven't yet, you should go ahead and join our PZ server. We hit over 350 unique members this past wipe and are only growing. Also, I want to give a quick thank you to my patrons and YouTube members who are a major reason that I'm able to make this kind of content for you all. I'll have more about both of these at the end. I do have one more thing to touch real quick. I want to give a very heartfelt thank you to all of you who have supported my channel over this past year. I released part 1 of this series back in January to 340 subscribers and a premiere audience of 3. As of last week, we hit 25,000 subscribers and averaged around 550 concurrent viewers per premiere at this time. Never thought I'd get 1,000 subscribers, let alone 25,000, and even more so in 5 months. So I really appreciate everything you've given me, and I'm excited to continue making content for you all as best that I can, or until I run out of jokes at least. But enough of the sappy stuff, let's get into the Cosby jokes and car crashes. I arrived in Muldra mid-morning and was able to make it to my base location without destroying my car, so that's a win. I had a pretty ambitious base plan for this city, and I picked a place that had at least some sentimental value to me. This house is where I made my first base in Project Zomboid ever. It sounds stupid, but I wanted to do something that would kind of cement this area for me, and what better way to do it than in the series that caused my channel to explode. Spent a lot of the day just moving all my gear into the house and then fighting all the zombies in the area. Started out 703 by moving my building materials outside to better organize myself. After building a flight of stairs, I fell through the roof and found myself in critical condition. What a lovely way to start the day. After building out the platform around the second floor, I spent the rest of the day just setting up the kitchen, organizing my gear into different piles, just generally cleaning up the vicinity. In the morning of 704, I piled up all the bodies in the area and decided to head out on a looting run through the neighborhood. I also laid out the plans for the new base. The idea revolves around using 4 houses, each set up with their own purposes, such as a workshop for crafting, an armory for all my weapons, and a massive kitchen and garden area. I have some ideas as to how I'm going to tie these all together, but I don't really want to play on my cards yet before even getting started. Spent the rest of the day just cutting down trees, which is just what everyone wants to see so early on. Following the events of 704, day 705 was spent entirely just sawing logs and putting planks into a giant pile. I know it looks like a lot, but we really do have a shit ton of work to accomplish to make this space work. Next on my to-do list was to acquire a ton of nails. Unfortunately for me, there was a thunderstorm today, and I didn't trust myself not to total my car. Decided to spend some time fortifying my base a little bit more and took the sledge over to the kitchen to clear out most of the interior. On 707, I decided to head out to the warehouses near me to loot it for pretty much anything I could find. After just one building, I ended up with 10 boxes of nails, some more tools, metalworking gear, and a bunch of other shit. Still had one more warehouse to loot, and I took care of that on 708 with basically the same results. Days 709 through 711 were spent getting started on the highway system that would connect all 4 bases together. Built a platform out from the main base over to the kitchen, and then built out the second floor platform circling the house. On 711, I had an oh shit moment when I was building out around to the highway and just floated out into the void. After reloading, I fell to the ground and got hit with critical damage. The only way I could think to fix that would be to build some walls, but this has happened twice in this series now, and I think it's due to jumping on the highway while time is sped up. On 712, I wrapped up the highway to the kitchen, and also had another instance of becoming Jesus where my character decided to walk off the highway into the sky. After that wrapped up, I decided to get some action in. Having run out of planks on day 712, I spent the next day just cutting down all the trees around me. On 714, I set up a cabbage garden by the kitchen and then went out on a looting run. That really just ended up turning into clearing out some zombies in the area. The only real goal I had with the looting run was to grab more garbage bags so that I can make some rain collectors for the garden. Day 715 was spent out at the self-storage. Wanted to go through and loot the area and then disassemble all the metal for some resources that I could use on the base. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't find a key in any of the bodies, so I had to resort to breaking down the doors with the metal pipe. Not the worst thing in the world since I needed an excuse to put some XP into my maintenance skill, but I wasn't able to break in until after 4 PM. I think it's rained almost every day that I've been in MD so far. Anyway, I spent the morning of 7/16 building out a gate on the southern end of the neighborhood, and then building out walls to connect it to the fencing that already existed. After that, I got to work building out the next path to what would become the armory. This continued for the next few days as I built out the middle section to connect all 4 houses together on the second level. This was set to make it so that even if any of the gates were breached, I wouldn't have to worry as I could just travel on the second floor. Around this time, it became obvious that the highway wasn't going to work, so I disassembled all of that and started building out these 3x3 platforms that I could use to just walk across. On 7/22, I fell off the platform again and hit highly critical damage. Not wanting to risk anything crazy, I spent the rest of the day hanging out around the base and cutting down more trees. Oh, I do have one tip to share with all of you who are moving copious amounts of lumber around. Got a couple comments saying that you can tie together groups of logs to reduce their weight limit and move much more that way. In my case, I would use 2 sheet rope to combine 4 logs. They each count for 12 kilograms towards your weight capacity, so you could, in theory, carry about 24 logs in one load as long as you had the sheet rope to do it. Getting back into things on day 7/23, I fluctuated between building and sawing logs over the next few days until finally wrapping up the platforms on day 7/25. Now granted, there's still a ton of work to do to flesh this thing out, but the necessities at least are taken care of. Now that the platforms were built, I could focus on securing the ground floors. Step 1 to that was taking a sledgehammer to all 4 buildings to remove any windows and doorways. After that was taken care of, I'd rebuild the frames with wooden walls to fully seal in the interior. Wrap this up on day 7/27. 7/28 was a looting run day. I was entirely out of food and needed to change that. As with any looting run, it started out with the surrounding houses until inevitably turning into a melee throwdown with all the zombies that I'd pissed off. At 7/29, I started out the day by clearing out some more zombies to my southwest. Breaking my spear, I decided to head over to the police station and loot whatever I could find. I actually found a crossbow here, which I thought was pretty funny, just imagining some cop walking around just Daryl Dixoning some random people at traffic stops. 7:30 was spent harvesting some of my cabbages around the garden. This actually took the majority of the day because I forgot where I put my shovel to dig more furrows and spent like 2 hours just running back and forth between the main house and the armory, because I'm a dumbass. On 7/31, I moved all of my crafting materials into the workshop house and then meal prepped some cabbage meals so that I wouldn't have to worry about food for a while. Next on my list was some freezers, but instead of that I ended up spending the entire day fighting my way through various buildings and looting them for more supplies. Found a couple freezers, but there were still too many zombies in Muldra. I also tried to double back to the gas station, but at that point was too exhausted to risk hanging around and just dipped back to base. Wanted to head back out the next day, but it was raining, so I decided to just spend the day tearing apart the interiors of the rest of the houses so that I could start building everything out the way I wanted it to be. After clearing out the area, I did a quick scan and realized that there's no freezers here. So, back to the stores that I was at previously. I was able to grab one of the coolers and bring them back, and then I'd be able to get the second one, but I could only fit 3 of the 4 pieces into my car due to forgetting about an extra generator just sitting in another seat. On 7/35, I spent the entire day cooking. I had peeked at my skills earlier and realized that I was pretty close to capping out cooking, so I grabbed about 75 cabbages and proceeded to make a shit ton of food. Chuck it onto the floor like Napoleon Dynamite when he's feeding that llama or whatever the fuck it is. And finally hit cooking level 10 in the evening that day. 7/36 was another day spent fighting zombies in the area. It was a lot of me just walking around spamming Q and then dealing with the consequences, so here you go. Day 737 saw me creating 22 wooden crate traps and placing those in the forest behind my budding fortress, which I realized on day 238 that I did not put far enough away as none of the traps were activated. This actually took the entire morning since I had to re-add bait to the traps and didn't have enough to refill all of them, so had to go all the way back to base, grab more cabbages, and then run back out to the new location and then add bait. Anyway, by the time that was wrapped up, it was already late afternoon, so I decided to spend the rest of the day just foraging. On 7:39, I started the day off by checking my traps, and then spent the rest of the day fighting more zombies. I'm trying to put more emphasis on using some axes right now, but I think I'm going to try shifting to another weapon type soon. Whatever I tend to have the most of is what I think I'll end up using for my time here. Over the next few days, I would basically just check traps in the morning and then proceed to spend the rest of the day clearing out zombies nearby, slowly expanding my perimeter. I also switched primarily to spears for combat just because they were the most readily available to me at the time. So here's some highlights of these days. I feel like I have at least one of these in episode, but in this case we're at 2. So I had another oh fuck moment when I started click walking through a patch of trees and ended up falling into a small horde of zombies. Luckily I was able to survive and walk away unscathed. After building a workbench on day 743, I decided to spend the rest of the day foraging. Nothing too exciting here. 7:44, I went out to grab some stuff for my houses, but realized there were way too many zombies in the highway still, so I decided to cut my losses for the day and return tomorrow to start clearing out the entire highway. Day 7:45 was basically just spent prepping for the craziness that was about to unfold. Spent most of the day making spears and adding knives to them and other various tools. Around 8 o'clock the next morning, I hopped in my car and drove out to the highway, where I proceeded to do a tactic that you've seen me do at least 10 times now. This went on for several days, so I'll show you some of that now, as well as some highlights of what happened. Now keep in mind, you're about to watch about 7 minutes of active combat, spanning through, I think, 6-7 days. So buckle up, strap in, grab some popcorn, and let's get to it. Now that I have some breathing room, I began building out the interior of my base. I spent 752 and 753 looting the warehouse to the northwest of MD, finding quite a few useful items like axes, hammers, and a shit ton of crafting materials. After that, I made runs back and forth picking up the metal shelves to use as storage. I know they don't have as much space as metal crates, but I really just like the way they look. Decided to spend 755 working on my crafting house. Cleaned up most of the floor and organized the 3 shelving units I had while listening to my favorite CD, Raps for Christ.
My crew is big and it keeps getting bigger. That's cause Jesus Christ is my name.
On 756 and 757, I turned my attention to the weapons room, building out a couple lockers to start sorting through all my junk. Spent a lot of 757 just disassembling more appliances to gather metal pipes to use for more lockers. On day 758, I kicked off the day by organizing my weapons lockers a little bit more before spending some time building and rearming more traps. I was basically out of room for rabbit meat at this point, so I was just hoarding meat and throwing it into random cabinets in nearby houses. I started the day off by killing some more zombies to the north before running out of spears again. Believe it or not, but it actually takes a considerable amount of time to craft new spears. Basically what I'm doing is making 15 to 20 spears at a time, and then attaching all my knives, screwdrivers, and all that shit onto the end to increase damage for them. Nothing crazy, but when you do that 15 times every few days, it starts to drag on. Sorry to disappoint, but the next few days were spent working on fishing. It's been like almost 300 days since I've done anything related to fishing, so it's time to get back into that. After 4 days, I finally leveled up fishing once to hit level 5. I can't wait to see how they fix this, because I feel like if you can level up foraging once a day at the same level, it shouldn't take 4 days of fishing to level up once. Since every time I've tried to get a skill grind episode going, it blows up in my face.
Did somebody say boom?
I wanted to take advantage of the setup that I currently had. Spent day 764 disassembling all of my electronics and then crafting some noisemakers and makeshift radios and then disassembling those. One thing that I was doing was keeping my white light bulbs separate so that I could use them to grind out some mechanic skill later on. Probably save that for next episode, but I figured it was worth mentioning now. Nothing left planned for the day, I just spent the rest of my time foraging. At this point, I'm really confident that I can knock out both foraging and trapping in this episode, so that became my new goal. If I can pull it off, I think this would be the first episode that I was able to max more than 2 skills. On 765, I spent the day doing a mix of foraging and fighting zombies as I came across them. Struck gold that evening when I found a katana stuck in a zombie. In honor of finding another katana, I decided to head out to McCoy and put it to good use. For the diehard fans who have been waiting on it, I pulled what has become my signature move at this point and slammed my car into the fence when I was coming back that afternoon. 767 was right back to foraging. Like I said, I'm really trying to just pound out trapping and foraging right now. Basically, every morning I'd loot the trap crates and start my day, which consisted of this. To try to expedite the process, I decided to spend the entirety of 768 cutting down trees to make as many traps as possible. By the time I wrapped up for the day, I was just under 50 traps. Which sounds like a metric shit ton of traps, but don't worry, I make more later on. To compensate for the amount of bait I'd need, I'd made a massive garden in the morning and subsequently spent the rest of the day watering it. It wasn't until later that night when the Indie Stone bent me over by making it rain, after I just spent 10 hours in-game watering cabbages. On 770, I woke up to the storm still raging on from yesterday. Decided that I'd spend some time crafting and got quickly distracted by the baseball bat modifications that I could make. The whole time I was looking at the crafting screen, I just kept thinking of Louisville. Call me over the top or whatever you want, but I had my mind made up before I could really think on it. Spent the rest of the day just gearing up for what would be the return to my favorite place in PZ. Until coming to my senses the next morning.
Gotcha, bitch!
Without teasing too much, there is a time and place for a return, but I have some things I need to wrap up here first. After leveling up my trapping and foraging, I decided it was time to hit up the bookstore in my area. Following the events of 771, I spent the entire day reading the final foraging book, one step closer to crossing it off the list. I wanted to start out 773 with some action, and it did not disappoint. Started off by rounding a small group to take on, and while waiting for more to show up, decided to grab some roses in the motel. Here's the third close call of the episode where I got stuck while trying to climb through a window and ended up on my back. I firmly believe that if I didn't have level 10 tailoring to boost my clothing, I would have been dead here. When that wrapped up, I started making my way back to base before totaling my car on a tiny tree. Pushed it back to base and decided that it looked better as a lawn ornament than a resource for now, and I could deal with fixing it up another time. On day 774, I decided to spend the day foraging. Actually, the next few days would be spent foraging to round off that skill. The only really exciting thing to happen to me was that I found an ambulance buried in the middle of the woods. No idea how it got there, but clearly took a wrong turn somewhere. Over the next few days, I'd wake up, check traps, dump the rabbits, and then start foraging for like 10-12 hours a day. I had a few close calls while in the woods, but otherwise it was pretty smooth. On 776, I leveled up to foraging 9, and on 777, I finally maxed out foraging, which is crazy to think that just a few months ago, you could search for 4 to 5 hours in-game without finding a single item, and now you can max out the final 2 levels in just 2 days. Now I could turn my focus to other things. I was still checking traps during the mornings, but after that I split my day into 2 things. First, I'd spend about 7 to 8 hours going around to various cars and stealing engine parts, and really anything else that looked like it'd hold value. In the afternoons and evenings, I'd turn my attention to fishing. I know this is probably a little tedious to watch at this point, but the good stuff's coming. Just hang in there. On day 779, I found a motorcycle in near perfect condition and decided to add it to the arsenal for like 15 seconds until I found a pretty big bug with the motorcycles. Around 12:30, I found myself bleeding when I tried to hop onto the bike. I didn't have any actual injuries, so it didn't make much sense to me. Decided to keep my health panel up and tried climbing back onto the bike and watched myself almost die before I even finished the animation. Cancelled out of it and chose to just avoid bikes for the rest of the playthrough. It's kind of a bummer because I was really excited to try these out, but looks like it'll have to wait for another time. On 780, I basically spent the entire day working on fixing up the Mustang. Nothing really much to see that you haven't already. Alright folks, I told you it was coming. Told you there was a time and a place for it. On the afternoon of day 781, I loaded up the car and set off for what would be a return to the city that gave me some of my favorite experiences in Project Zomboid. Along the way, I decided to stop and take on some of the zombies in the road. Now, I don't want it to get overly twisted here. I'm not planning on basing up in Louisville for the remainder of the series or anything like that. I just really wanted to start putting in some work onto my combat skills, and that's just the best place to do it. I'll be back to the base in MD for some more grinding, but right now, there's really only one place I want to be at. I reached the checkpoint late that evening and decided to rest up in the western side of the city on the outskirts until I tripped an alarm. After clearing out the zombies around my car the next morning, I decided to head over to the hospital, which was a POI that I didn't hit up during my time in Louisville, which is crazy to think that it's been around 400 days since my last time setting foot in here. I'll let a decent chunk of this play out because I actually love the location here and I wanted to showcase it a little bit. Okay, I have an embarrassing funny story about this. So while playing, I was so focused on what was going on that I wasn't blinking, and my left contact lens actually fell out of my eye when I remembered to blink. So I panic paused the game and sprinted to the bathroom to get it back in my eye. That's why there's a pause here. Anyway, back to the action. At this point, we've been going pretty hard for a couple hours now, and I was starting to get exerted. I wasn't done yet by any means, but I needed a place to rest, and the safest spot for that was in my car. After hopping in, I just drove around the parking lot until my exertion went away before heading back in for round 2.
I didn't hear no bell.
$783 was my second day at the hospital. After spending about 8 hours here yesterday, I had managed to get through the main sector of the first floor, but still had multiple floors and a whole other building to explore. The hospital is such a cool location to me, and I don't really know why. Maybe because I'm discovering it for the first time? I don't know. But it was loaded with zombies. I really didn't get to explore all of it, but the main building has at least 3 floors with different stairwells to explore, and a sky deck that walks you over to the second building, which I wasn't really able to check out due to the amount of zombies in the area. By the end of the day, I had burnt through almost all of my 5.56 ammo that I brought along, and had broken my katana. Oh, and I lost my hat. The next day, I decided to hit up the police station, another POI that I missed my first time around. Everything was going great until my car decided to mount a light pole, and I was trying to look at the PZ map on my other monitor. So, guess we're going on foot. After making it to the police station and clearing out the area, I wasn't able to grab a key, so I spent a few hours smashing down the door, which went about as well as you'd expect. By early evening, I needed to find some shelter, but as soon as I opened up a window to a house across the street, I tripped another alarm. Normally, I would have stayed to fight, but I was already tired and it wasn't worth fighting if I wasn't full strength to do it. Headed back into the police station and hid in one of the side rooms where I spent the night. After spending the morning clearing out some zombies in the area, I noticed a truck nearby. I ended up marking it on the map and then decided to head back to the Mustang to grab some spare parts and some more fuel. Only issue is I need a heavy duty battery, and the one in the truck is dead. Instead of worrying about that, I spent the rest of the day working on getting into the armory in the police station. On the morning of 7/86, I finally broke in and was able to grab a ton of ammo and 2 new guns, an AR-15 and an M4A1, as well as a ton of attachments to add to each. I also grabbed over 1,000 rounds of 223 ammo and spent a good 4 to 5 hours converting them to 5.56 rounds to use. After that, I went out in search of a car. Luckily, I didn't have to look too hard and found one right around the corner from the police station. So, I spent the rest of the day grabbing all my shit from the truck and the Mustang before continuing on my journey. Only thing worth noting for the rest of the day was that I found a Jeep in the parking lot and marked it for later. Not sure if I really have much use for it at this point, but it's something I'd like to drive eventually. Today, it's time to get to the main reason of why I crafted like 20 spears, drove all the way out here, wrecked my car, raided the hospital. Speaking of raid, did you know that this video is sponsored by Raid? Anyway, all the heart and soul bullshit, yada yada yada. We're going to the baseball bat factory that I didn't know was a baseball bat factory like 400 days ago and I burnt half of it down. By the time I'd cleaned out the main room, I already had 48 bats to use. Now, I feel like there's an expectation when I come to LV that I do some crazy shit, so I decided to spend the next few days just burning through all the spears that I'd brought. Let's cue the montage. Spent most of day 790 driving back to my base in Muldra. After getting back later in the afternoon, I spent the rest of the day just moving all the shit from my car into piles in their representative houses. I realized around this time that the base design I had initially was pretty crappy. It was something that sounded super cool in my head, but it looks terrible, and it would have just been much easier to make one large base. Oh, also, I completely forgot to turn on the generator in my kitchen, so literally all of my food was rotted. And in addition to that, I didn't harvest any of my cabbages, so that massive garden I had, gone. 791 was spent replanting my cabbage garden, which actually took most of the day. After that wrapped up, I spent the remainder of my time emptying all of the food that had spoiled during my vacation to Louisville. At 792, I cleaned up the piles of loot that I'd left around the various houses. In the evening, I finally tried to make some chained baseball bats, but realized that I needed ripped sheets, which I didn't have. That'd be a goal for tomorrow then, I guess. So I set off the next morning to grab some ripped sheets, and by the early afternoon I was ready to get to work. I was really excited to get to try this new variant out, since I'd only ever used spike bats with nails, and it just didn't work? Or did it? The name of the bat is still the same, but the icon is different now, and if you hover over it, the bat says baseball bat with chain. And when you compare the chain bat with a normal baseball bat, there's a considerable damage buff, so we're sticking with it. 794 was kind of a throwaway day. Really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and ended up just working on mechanics for the entire day. On day 795, I went out and spent the entire day building more rabbit traps. I know this probably seems a little monotonous at this point, but trapping was a skill that I really just wanted to be done with. By 11 p.m. that night, I had around 80 traps made, but no bait to put in them. Truth be told, I barely had enough tomatoes to bait all the traps, which surprisingly takes almost an entire day to do. I figured today would be as good as any to try out the chain bat, so I geared up and wandered out into the city. Gotta say, chain baseball bat is a little underwhelming. I guess hoping to become Negan was too high of an expectation to set, but it didn't feel all that different from the regular baseball bats, aside from the little chain sound effect that was added. On 798, I planted some potatoes and used the rest of my tomatoes rearming the traps. When all was said and done, I walked away with 54 rabbits. The only issue now is that I'm completely out of bait. 799 was spent just running through Muldra searching for groups of zombies to fight. I even started up the ambulance siren to try to pull some, but only ended up with a couple stragglers wandering over. On day 800, I drove down the highway a ways until I found a couple hordes to take on. After cleaning out the first group, I went exploring and found a small campsite, as well as the farmhouse that I somehow didn't end up at this episode. After that, I drove back out to the highway, where I found another horde roaming around and took them out as well. Alrighty, 800 days in the books. I think it's safe to say we're on the home stretch here. Got some pretty big ideas planned for next episode, so make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out whenever I get around to releasing that. Thanks again to all my patrons and YouTube members. You're the reason I'm able to make these longer styled videos, and I appreciate everything you guys do for me. Links to join both of those are down below, and you get some pretty cool perks for joining. As I mentioned in the beginning, I have a PZ server that we've been running for a few months now, where we currently feature a full economy, active quests, multiple traders, and trading outposts, world events, and so much more. You can join that by joining my Discord server through the link in the description, and then grabbing the PZ server role from the Reaction Roles channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, thanks for stopping by.